definitely don't give the impression of being serious and concerned people looking out for the public welfare.
That's right. And they're certainly not scholars.
Yeah, so I mean, it's very difficult for me to see them as anything besides a reasonably clever front for something else. But the front, the persona or the public image that they're trying to generate, my impression is it just doesn't really hold much water. They're trying to create the public image of a secular kind of statism that's a kind of high level prank in order to confront religious intolerance and oppression and ignorance. So they're using Satanism as a kind of a sort of joke and a way to provoke and you know, force people to question their values on the one hand, and on the other hand they're really trying to bring about changes, positive changes for people. And then specifically around the satanic ritual abuse, their angle is that the satanic panic, everybody knows it was all mass hysteria, and that dozens of people were, you know, convicted who were innocent, and so on and so forth. That narrative, which most people still believe, even though we have a book like Ross Chait's The Witch Hunt Narrative, which thoroughly examines that and shows that it's simply not true. There was no satanic panic in the sense of mass hysteria. There was a lot of confusion, but essentially there was as much fire as there was smoke there. So, but they're depending on people's ignorance around that and this residual belief that there was something called the satanic panic and it harmed a lot of innocent people and there were no abused children. Now, it just seems very difficult what they're trying to do, because in our current climate, we're more and more aware that organized child abuse and trafficking is a reality, on the one hand. And on the other hand, the whole satanic panic thing has completely gone. Like, how many people are being falsely or convicted in any way at all of satanic ritual abuse? It's not happening, is it? There aren't allegations flying around about this thing. There isn't any kind of hysteria.
There are convictions about organized abuse, and some of those cases, I believe, do have some trappings of Satanism, but the you know, that isn't out there in the media as the primary thing. I believe the Jimmy Saville stuff in England and the Marc Dutroux one in Europe, I'm not sure quite where they are, had some satanic trappings involved. But I think people are realizing that it's not necessarily just Satanism. We have organized perpetrator groups, and some of those people are now getting caught. They put stuff on the internet, and thanks to the internet, they can be investigated more effectively than they used to be.
Yeah.
But no, we don't have any satanic panic going on. I think there are some vested interests who would want to make sure that that the satanic panic myth or the witch hunt narrative is resurrected. What happened was, I think, in the 90s, in my experience in the early 90s as a therapist, I got my first clients who were talking about satanic ritual abuse, and it was a local group, and they were all members of the same group, and they corroborated one another's stories. Plus, I mean, I had my car followed by those people, you know, not my clients, but by members of the group. And there were, you know, there was plenty of evidence that something was going on that was real. And meanwhile, all these big, in the 90s, there were lawsuits against therapists. And some of the leaders in the field, like Bennett Braun, you know, got lawsuits. There were complaints to professional societies. There were just a lot of awful things going on to try and stop therapists who were talking about this. And they succeeded. They got people to be quiet at conferences, to not talk about it. I think it was 94 when I first went to, and maybe it was earlier than that, when I first went to a conference of the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. It was in Vancouver, BC that year. And so I went to it and was delighted that people were talking about the same things that I had experienced. The next year, I went to the same conference. It was in a different location, and discovered that nobody was talking about it except quietly in the hallways. There were no talks on the subject. Everybody had been silenced. Therapists had been silenced in talking about this because they were afraid of lawsuits and complaints and all of those things. And I think the same thing is happening now. And so therapists got silenced. And meanwhile, research continued and people discovered things. You know, there was a big study by Linda Meyer-Williams looking at people who had forgotten their childhood abuse versus people who'd always remembered it, and discovering with validated abuse, people whose abuse had been validated by medical people right after it happened. And there was, you know, it showed that recovered memories were just as valid as always held memories. There were things like this going on, and the field was progressing with research. But meanwhile, everybody was quiet. And now the field has progressed a lot, and I would guess that the same vested interests who were behind the False Memory Syndrome Foundation are still active. They don't want anybody to believe that organized abuse happens, and particularly that there's any Satanist connections in that. And so they're getting active again to try and silence us. Less or more.